Hello, you're listening to Covid-tinted Glasses with Georgina. I'll be speaking to people from all around the world about their unique experiences of the pandemic, the good, the bad, the beautiful and the downright ugly, covering topics like friendship, family, travel, work, mental health and finding love. If you'd like to join me for a chat, then get in touch at georgina_podcast@outlook.com. Hello and welcome to Covid-tinted Glasses. I'm Georgina and joining me is Jana Bakunina, Russian but currently living in London, writer, traveller and founder of Life Tonic. Jana, it's been ages to see you face to face. I think we bumped into each other on a bicycle a year or so ago.
I think it was maybe more like 5 years ago.
Oh my God. Yeah, it was a long time ago. But I have been, we've been keeping in touch via social media. And I really wanted to get you on because you are quite inspirational, actually, because you are the one person that has traveled last year quite extensively. And you're always doing stuff, even in a pandemic. And you have a lot of other stuff to deal with as well, which we'll get into. So why don't you give the listeners a little introduction to yourself, where you're based, a little bit about yourself and what you're currently doing in life.
Okay, well, I think the obvious one is that, yes, I'm Russian. I live in London, have lived in London for more than 20 years now. I currently work in business development for an animation company called Silvergate Media, which is owned by Sony. But as you can see, so COVID has inspired me last year to build a little cacti shrine, as I call it. And you could see that, you know, the cacti thrive in here. There are plenty more in front of me. I'm not going to turn the screen because otherwise, you know, things may fall off. But and so, yeah, so I think, you know, you're quite right that I am an avid traveler, and I sort of, it's interesting because I never compromised on travel, you know, whether I had the money or not, had the health or not, had the sort of, you know, opportunity, I always just went for it, said yes to opportunities and just always prioritized travel. I mean, this shelf is like from IKEA or something. It wasn't expensive. And the plants, of course, have a certain criteria. So they have to be travel proof, which means that summer or winter, they should be able to survive 3 to 4 weeks without me. And if they die, they're just not good enough.
Get rid of them.
Well, I mean, they kind of die, and I feel sorry, but I'm sorry. Like if you can't survive 3-4 weeks on your own in winter or in the summer when it's hot, it's just, we're not meant for each other. So basically, just, sorry, I keep talking, but on travel, so what happened is that I have friends who have, a friend who whose objective it was to get to 100 countries before he turned 50. And I thought, I could do better. I'm going to try to do 100 countries before I turned 40. And I did that. I turned 40, and, you know, that was 21st of December, 2019, and, you know, a couple of days later or something, COVID became a thing. I mean, obviously we haven't heard about it. Well, we haven't taken it seriously until a couple of months later. But basically, the fact that I was locked down at home in London without an opportunity to travel, you know, was kind of sad, but it wasn't a disaster because I was like, well, you know what, I've done it. Like, of course, I want to go back on the road, but I'm very pleased that I've been always maximizing travel opportunities.
You because normally over Christmas you go away for at least 3 or 4 weeks every year. I mean, religiously, don't you?
Yes, in fact, so that last Christmas, so last year in 2020, I managed to have travel to 6 countries other than the UK, which is kind of crazy, right? But so I came back from Ethiopia in sort of mid-January. And in Ethiopia, so they have this tradition. So, for example, if you come as a guest to someone's house, they would cook something nice for you, which would be meat, because they actually don't eat meat a couple of days a week. They call it fasting. I mean, they're not fasting, they're just not eating meat. But if you came to someone's house, they would cook something nice for you. It would be like, say, mincemeat or like, strips of meat. And if you're a guest, a host would take a piece of meat with his hands and kind of like feed it. And so you are meant to kind of eat it from, his fingers. It's usually a he. And so I experienced it a few times, including once I basically booked this like a tourist transfer from like one. So I was going to Lalibela for their Orthodox Christmas celebration, beginning of January. And basically I got a driver. There were a couple of more people in that minibus. And so he stopped for a break, which is good, dangerous driving, long road. And he ordered some meat because it was Christmas. And so the tourist kind of ordered, I don't know, cappuccinos, while I kind of ordered this traditional coffee that they do on the tray. And we sat together and he ordered that meat and he kind of fed me. I mean, I don't know whether he's been to the bathroom to clean his hands or not, but you could not refuse, because it would be super rude to do that. And I was thinking, oh my God, COVID pandemic, Ethiopia, like it's not going to work. And, I think originally they did very well in Africa. I think now it's worse, the situation there, but hopefully Africa is doing relatively okay, given its relatively young population, and the fact that like young people may kind of carry it, but not suffer, too badly. But yeah, so that was last kind of adventurous country, I would say, that I visited.
Yeah, and I have to say that I don't actually need to go to Ethiopia anymore, because you have done it and you write such good write-ups about it that it's almost, I mean, I will go if I wanted to, but it's you write such good write-ups with such good photos that it's fantastic. So we all get a slice of Jana's travel experience. But you didn't. So that was just before the pandemic became official. But then what really struck me was that during the pandemic, as you said, you traveled to another 5 or 6 different countries, as well as traveling extensively in the UK. And so what were the other countries you went to?
Well, I went to Greece. I went to Santorini and Foligandros. And actually, Santorini was a place I've never been to before. It's kind of one of those places you have to see. It has this reputation for being super touristy, and I thought it was super touristy, but actually it wasn't at all. So normally you get all this like massive tourist ships that come and just kind of stand there, and people go off the boat for a day. So they might kind of roam around the island, the Oya, this beautiful, white buildings. They might have lunch, have some seafood lunch. And so I thought the island was busy, but actually it was not. And in fact, all the views, if you're on the island and you look at the sea, normally you have this like awful looking giant ships, which you don't want to see, really, ideally. So I was pretty lucky with that. I also went to Gibraltar just because I thought I need to go to one more country. Like I want to go to one more country if I can. I mean, that is a weird place. I mean, that one you can say, okay, I'm glad you've done it. I don't need to go. But actually for a weekend, it was perfect because I went at the end of October. The weather was amazing and you can do really good hiking there. It has this like really beautiful national park. It has this weird tunnels kind of from Second World War and from the Great War. It has an amazing, beautiful cave. So that was cool. And then I also went to Lanzarote and Fuerteventura, so the Canary Islands, where I've never been. And I kind of thought, oh gosh, these are kind of like a bit boring touristy places that Brits and Germans go to. Oh my God, Lanzarote is the most incredible island. It's naturally very beautiful. It has all the volcanic kind of nature. It has vineyards, volcanic vineyards, and it has incredibly beautiful architecture. So the kind of famous architect who was from there, he campaigned to leave the island absolutely kind of pristine, so that anything new you're building, it has to sort of really be connected to nature, so it doesn't have any of the kind of horrible resorts that you might imagine anywhere in Spain, you know, like on the kind of resorts. So it was just amazing. But basically, I lived there for a month, so I was able to work, you know, well, we all kind of, most of us are working from home if you have a sort of an office job. And yeah, and, you know, Fuerteventura, if you're a surfer, if you're a kite surfer, if you simply like endless beaches, which are like impossible, you know, you can kind of walk forever. And at some point you have to go back because, you know, it's a long walk. So that was, yeah, absolutely fantastic. And I think that, you know, like I would not normally choose to go somewhere like this, but I think if you go with the right attitude and you kind of try to like be friendly with people and say, okay, like this is like a lovely little wine bar, but where can I have proper fish? You know, I mean, of course, it's like TripAdvisor, Lonely Planet, whatever, friends who've been there before, but you can kind of, you know, especially now because like COVID, certain places were closed, you get like good advice, and you could completely avoid also like the tourist strips, you know, where like I might be thinking, oh, I'm going to get a bus to kind of go and do this hike, and then I'll be on the other side of the island and I'll kind of go on this beach and have this amazing seafood lunch. There'll be people having a beer at 9 o'clock in the morning, you know, and that's kind of fine. I mean, I'm not judging. I am judging. Let's
But when you were there, that was actually kind of when things were starting to get quite tough again back over in the UK. And
second lockdown. I mean, don't hate me, but I've completely missed second lockdown. I was not here.
No, and I remember getting in touch with you because I was like, will she be able to get back? But she didn't. You didn't want to get back, did you? You were quite happy where you were.
Yeah, no, actually, it's kind of, it's interesting because, you know, like I'm like a very confident traveler, but this pandemic has kind of, you know, I'm also a sensible person, you know, and so with this pandemic, you kind of had to be a bit more cautious and careful. Like literally a friend of mine who lives in Ukraine recently asked me, oh, you've been to Nepal, what are your travel tips? You know, I'm trying to think like this way or that way. And I kind of gave him the tips. I'm like, are you watching the news? You know, like Nepal, India. I mean, you're not going there right now, are you? He was like, oh, you know, I just thought the flights look cheap. I'm like, I was like, okay. But so when I went to Lanzarote, I thought I was going to go for, you know, like 10 or 12 days. And then come back and sort of, you know, suffer with everyone else in the lockdown. And then when I arrived there, my BA return flight was cancelled pretty much less than 24 hours after I arrived. And then I kind of panicked because I was like, oh my God. And I booked a Ryanair return flight back because Ryanair was like thinking, you know what, we're going to keep flying. And then I kind of thought, well, why did I do that? So I ended up giving more money to Ryanair to, you know, rebook my flight and just kind of stay. But then I made the mistake of coming back. And then I was locked down for the lockdown number 3 with everyone else. But I am itching. And let me tell you, I've booked my first trip.
Tell me. Well, actually, before we talk about that, I just want to really explain to people how hardcore you actually are, because when you go away traveling, you literally take one bag, don't you? You have like a routine as to how much luggage you're going to take, and you are what I would call an intrepid budget traveler, and you do go and see all the places that possibly a lot of people wouldn't go to because they're almost dangerous. So tell people a bit about that.
Yes, so I do fundamentally believe that you have to travel light. You really don't need stuff. You know, you need kind of the absolute basics. You need your sunglasses. You need your swimming costume. You need something warm, something to kind of go out. By the way, I always travel with makeup and with something nice. So I'm not able to change that very often, but yeah, like, you could pack a lot in a backpack. But it's not to say that I haven't sort of, encountered problems. It's just that, sometimes, of course, bad things happen. I mean, nothing, too bad has happened to me. I was actually harassed in Ethiopia. This was kind of the worst thing I've ever experienced, and that was quite recent. But then you just have to, think like, no, this could happen anywhere, and it's just kind of one of those things that, the more you travel, the more you're likely to encounter something like this. It's like, I don't know, if you're going to the theater a lot, and if you read a lot of books, you will inevitably see not so good plays, and you will read some crappy books if you read a lot and you go to the theater a lot and you travel a lot. So you just have to kind of accept that.
Yeah, and also you also have ME as well, don't you? So you have, and that, I know you have very difficult days, but you do seem to have such fortitude in preventing it from stopping you from doing the things you really, really want to do. I know that some days you have to be careful, but yeah. I think that shows great strength. So where do you think that kind of comes from?
Well, so I mean, yes. So ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, it's basically a disease which has no cure currently, and there are no kind of medication or anything that you can kind of take to make it better. The only thing you can do is to sort of manage symptoms, and basically it is possible to do that. So if anyone listening to this who is struggling and experiencing that, there are good resources. So there are groups on Facebook. There is a lot of information now. So I've had it now for 8 years, and basically, it's possible to kind of, pace yourself. You cannot do too much of anything. You cannot exercise too much. You cannot do anything cognitive too much. You certainly have some emotional stress. You sort of also need to make sure you rest. And sometimes it's quite unpredictable. So it's like, a phone which you sort of absolutely have to charge overnight, but you're not going to get the full day worth of charge. So I kind of lose my battery power earlier than, a healthy person. And sometimes it's kind of unpredictable as to when it's kind of run out of juice completely. And then I meditate. So I meditate religiously. I mean, not religiously in a religious context, but as in I do it every day, have done now for the past 7 years. For about 20 minutes, sometimes even less, and that really helps me. And as for endurance and challenges, well, so last year I've discovered the Southwest Coast Path, which is the most amazing thing that happened to me last year. In fact, it was a friend of mine who gave me a book called Salt Path, which is sort of a memoir written by someone who has trodden that path before. And in fact, I intend to write a blog for my website, Life Tonic, about it. But basically, I read that book, and it's not a particularly great book, but it inspired me to go and explore it for myself. So it's basically, I think it's like 700 miles or something, 1,000-kilometer coastal path, which was basically officially kind of opened in the 70s in the UK. Obviously, unofficially, this kind of, paths have existed since, time immemorial. It starts in Minehead in Somerset, and you kind of wave your way down through a little bit of Somerset, then you get into Devon and Cornwall and Devon again, Dorset, etc., until you get to Poole. So, depending on how fit you are, how determined, I think I'm sure there are some records, but basically it's kind of, it would take 2.5-3 months or something to do the whole path, which basically means, days and weeks of pleasure, incredible endurance as well. So last year, as soon as the lockdown was lifted and we were allowed to travel and campsites were going to open, I packed up my little bag and my bag my tent and my sleeping bag and, you know, some waterproof stuff, because it's England, of course. And I went down to Minehead, and I did first 7 days from Minehead to Clovelly. And then I went again in August, and I went from Clovelly to Newquay. And it is, and I'm using this guidebook, which sort of suggests, you know, kind of how much you do in a day. So it's, you know, it could be anything from 6 to 9 hours. It is bloody difficult. It is, you know, like right now I'm sitting here and I'm thinking like, this is where I'm going, by the way. So I'm planning to go back on the 21st of May. And I'm thinking, how did I do it? You know, because this is, you know, it's a big deal. But actually, there is some magic there. You know, you just get down to the coast, and it almost doesn't matter what the weather is like, because it's that fresh air, it's the sea, the people you encounter, usually just locals who are going on a walk, you know, just for a day or whatever, for a couple of hours, maybe to walk the dog, or everyone is so incredibly nice, which I always like. So I always like to get out of London in the UK to sort of, you know, nothing against Londoners, but we're not the nicest people, let's just be honest. And just to go and meet people who are super friendly, super chatty. And, you know, everyone is always like impressed. Oh, you're doing the path. I always wanted to do that. And I'm like, well, what's stopping you? And, you know, so like, I hope that, you know, it is the most incredible experience. And, you know, like you could stay in campsites. You could be super organized and kind of book your B&Bs and your hotels, which is sort of, you know, some people do that. So I tend to kind of, you know, book maybe a couple of campsites and then kind of go with the flow.
Yeah, you do wild camp, don't you, quite a bit as well?
I thought that's illegal, George. We cannot possibly.
Oh, sorry. Yes. No, we never
don't do things like that.
But the other thing I was going to.
Extreme circumstances when campsites are closed due to COVID. It's 5 o'clock in the evening. It's raining, and there's nowhere else to stay. Not as a rule.
No, not as a rule. Very good. And I do think that you kind of put us all to shame a little bit when you first did it, because it was at the, you know, we were still in the middle of the pandemic, and you were like, come on, all you need to do is get on a train. And then you get there and you kind of walked it. And I remember emailing you going, that's the beach where I go surfing. And because I could picture exactly where you kind of walked all the way along. And you did kind of really, I'm sure, inspire quite a lot of people to get off their backsides, out of their houses, and, you know, at least to a park or, you know, somewhere closer to home to actually, you know, see a bit of the country, or, you know, to get some experience. That's something I definitely get from your messages and social media. And just to take us on a little tangent, so you mentioned theatres. And so before the pandemic, the other thing you used to write a lot about was the plays.
Can I just very quickly say, you know, about getting off your backside? You know, I want to say that I find it hard as well, because we are kind of now, you know, right now I'm thinking, okay, well, I've been sitting here at home since December. Well, actually since, I came back at the end of November, which is like probably the longest I've not left London, you know, and it's kind of like, you know, there is a routine, you know, everything is the same every day. And, you know, I have that fear, this reluctance to go somewhere. And I kind of feel like, ooh, how is this? But you just have to go for it. It's like, it's absolutely normal to feel apprehensive and kind of a bit funny about it, because we now got used to something else. But I absolutely promise you that as soon as you get out of here and kind of challenge yourself to do something and just go for it, it'll be so rewarding. And you'll be like, oh, I don't know what I was afraid of. So if anyone is kind of needs an extra push, yeah, you should definitely do it. And feeling apprehensive is normal.
I think that you've put it very, very well there, because I was going to move on to, so before the pandemic, you used to go to the theatre a lot. And
Yeah.
you've also written a book called Bird's Milk, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
Thank you.
And I gather there may be a play on the horizon.
Well, yes. So last year, I kind of thought I need something to define 2020 other than COVID, which I've had, and the pandemic and lockdowns. And so as I was sort of recovering from COVID, just before I had it, which was at end of March, I actually enrolled in this course at City Lit, which is it's this place in Covent Garden. They do adult learning courses, and now obviously they are online, so anyone can find something exciting there, because a lot of them are done via Zoom or whatnot. But so I enrolled. My office was right next to it, like literally 2 minutes walk, if that. And so there was a course which was just like a short course, a few weeks, one class a week. What can we learn from classic plays? So I thought, well, I go to the theatre a lot. I absolutely love it. I mean, that's kind of, for me, this is what London is about. It's incredible food and theatre. Obviously, I have friends, but, what I mean is that now we don't have that. And you kind of think, why am I in London? Why am I not somewhere, very beautiful in Cornwall? Well, because I've got a mortgage, I guess. But so that course was really cool, really interesting. And every week we sort of talked about a particular theatre movement. And we would, read a play or an extract, depending on how ambitious you were. And we sort of discussed certain techniques. And at the end of every class, we also did a bit of work, like you might have to write a dialogue or do something, just like 15 minutes. But at the beginning of the class, which was still, we were in the room. So this was before pandemic. We ended up online. The teacher sort of asked us all to introduce ourselves and tell us about, the writing that we've done. Well, I thought wow, kind of interesting that people have done writing at all. Well, I've written a memoir, kind of, I'm, a mile ahead of everyone else, probably. Not so. Every single person, except for one other person, who was an English teacher, meaning Shakespeare every day, or, so every other person, there were maybe 14 of us in total, has written at least one play, if not a musical. And, I'm not competitive or anything, but I just sat there and I thought, what? And so in the back of my mind, I thought, well, who are these people? Are they special, or can anyone do it? And so basically, I think and then it obviously transpired over the next few weeks that people have maybe wrote something that they never finished, or certainly didn't go anywhere. Well, I made a bit of a mistake, because basically, well, it's not a mistake. It's just that, rather than writing an original play, I had this idea about a novel that I've read years ago. And I just thought it may work very well on stage. And so as I was recovering from COVID, I reread that novel, and I thought, it definitely has everything you need to know. There are 3 very strong characters, and there is heaps of tension, there is transformation, and then there is bam, a finale. So I then wrote a play. I hired the tutor that I had at City Lit to kind of critique it for me, and he did that 3 times. So obviously I have a day job, so I kind of did it when I had time, and I took some days off, because we all had plenty of days off. And eventually, so I sort of was ready, maybe early February. I contacted the author of the novel, asked her for permission to sort of do something with it. And this is, I'm not going to tell you who it is, but it's an accoladed author you would have heard of, who said, yeah, see what you can kind of do, if you can find an interesting party. So I then, contacted a couple of people that are kind of vaguely new in the theatre land, so 2 production companies, and it was kind of incredible because they, in fact, read my script, because I'm like a nobody. I just wrote something, and they said that, like they managed to read the whole thing through in one sitting, which apparently is unusual. They loved it in terms of like I did a very good job. It was everything there, but but they kind of like, well, one company just hated the ending, which I was faithful to the novel, and the other kind of thought that maybe you can kind of tweak something, but we've got our slate is now kind of full because we're working something else, and so and I haven't sort of made any other progress on that. So I've also applied to a couple of other theatre sort of production development schemes, and I sent it to the National Theatre and the Royal Court Theatre, obviously, because I've got to aim high. Haven't heard back, but they take 3 to 6 months and they may never come back to you. But it was a really cool experience where I've also learned that the kind of what's called a dream ending apparently is a thing in literature, and I've never studied literature, other than at school. So apparently it's kind of like, it's like a bit of a Marmite. So when you have a big reveal at the end of a novel or a play, so it may kind of divide people. Some people just don't like it. And clearly I was the person who thought it's the best thing ever. So anyway, the short of it is that I have written a play. I think it's bloody good. But it's also very disappointing because a play is not something you can kind of just, hooray, you can, get it published. Like, it's just a piece of paper. It's not yet a production. So while I've been encouraged to write something original by these production companies who've read it, I'm also thinking that, a play is really difficult emotionally because you kind of do all the work and then if you don't see it on stage, like I want more. So right now my creative project is short stories.
Yes, and that's something that you will then actually have a book at the end of it, even if you self-publish. So you'll be able to see it in real life. That's really exciting. So how far along is that project?
Well, again, it's kind of, short stories is, again, a sort of a controversial choice because some people would say that, who likes them? But actually, I never liked them until I read a book by George Saunders, who's a Booker-winning author. He also teaches creative writing at Syracuse University in New York. And apparently his most favorite module is Russian literature, specifically short stories, Russian short stories of the sort of late 19th, early 20th century. And so he wrote this book, which is called A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, where he analyzes, I think about, I can't remember now, 5 or 10 Russian short stories. So they're quite different. And he sort of teaches you how to appreciate them and kind of how to write them. So it's a book for writers, any kind of writers, and also for kind of geeky readers. When you read and you kind of, ooh, this is like a cool way of doing this, or, So I was totally inspired by this book. And I thought also that short stories are kind of cool because you can kind of write one, and then you can edit it to death, because if you're writing a novel, you don't have time to edit something to death. You kind of have to keep going. You have to kind of keep the narrative going. Same with a play, actually. You just need to sort of develop it. If you write an article, you want to get it out, With a short story, it has to be so perfect as you can possibly get it. So you sort of write, and then you can spend longer time just editing it. So I've written 2 so far, which I'm happy with. I started the 3rd, but I've been kind of busy at work and other things. So it's kind of there, but it's and you probably need sort of 10 for a collection. So it's, but like, I think like all that stuff, like I really believe that creativity is something we all need in our lives. And a lot of people may say, well, I'm not creative at all, which is hopefully not true, because a lot of people love, baking or cooking or gardening, or it doesn't have to be something like what's really called art, but I think it's this kind of incredible outlet where you are allowed to play, you are allowed to do what you do, such as doing a podcast, and to sort of have something that's kind of yours, that you're not taken seriously, that you are not, doing because you want to make money of it. Obviously, if you end up making money of it, it's good, but that's not what you're doing it. And it's just something that would give you satisfaction no matter what. So you might have had, a bad day at work, or something wrong with your family, or, relationship. But this is something that is really yours, where you're able to express yourself. And I think that we all need a bit of that, especially, in times of COVID, where we had this kind of like time on our hands. And it's not that you had to do something. You didn't have to go on some kind of banana, bacon, bread bandwagon. But I think if you had something that you could kind of do and just kind of think, well, I'm going to hold on to that, then you kind of, well, retain some sanity. That's the first thing. But then you also can look back at your year, as I've done at the end of last year, and say, you know what? Well, I've started on the Southwest Coast path, and I've written a play. I've also had COVID, but, that wasn't very exciting, and that didn't define it for me.
No, and just I think it's really amazing, because you always seem to have something on the go. So the short stories are great, because you can, when you in between, you can have a bit of a break and then start the next one. But back to COVID, because that was a bit of a nightmare for you, especially because of the symptoms, well, the long-term symptoms, because they're quite similar to CFS. Yeah. How are you feeling now?
So I probably had what's kind of called long COVID, which is basically, post-viral fatigue. So same as kind of how ME/CFS has started for me for about 3 months. So I had COVID for 2 weeks, and then I wasn't quite well for the next 3 months. So didn't have much energy, had kind of, I don't know, some sort of pressure in my chest, that kind of stuff. And now I've definitely kind of recovered from that. Obviously, I was able to do that incredible hiking. I haven't quite recovered to the level of fitness that I had, over a year ago before I had COVID, because I've had sort of my illness for 8 years, and I was able to sort of gradually, let the body repair itself. So I have not had kind of very good last, 2.5, 3 months. I'm better now. In fact, I went for my first jog this morning. I managed 27 minutes, which is kind of amazing, even though very slow, but that's not the point. So I think it's sort of, I really feel for people who are experiencing long COVID, because it is so difficult. You have, I think it's like going through several stages of grief, because you first are trying to deny it. You're kind of thinking, oh, no, I can run, I can work full time, I can do, look after my kids and do all the rest of it. You can't. And then you're feeling very angry. Then there is also compassion fatigue from your friends and family, because you're not well for a long time, and it's kind of like there is no end to it. It's very difficult to explain a chronic illness. And then, what you really need to do is to sort of accept it, which is incredibly difficult, because you kind of, you don't want to accept that. But once you're able to accept that life has changed, you just have to find other ways to make yourself happy. So, for example, when I first got kind of ME and I talked to a doctor who is a specialist, he recommended, it was like, do you meditate? I was like, yes. how once a day. He was like, meditate twice a day. I was like, okay, okay, I don't have time for that, but well, like, you can find time. But he was saying to me, I think I said to him that, when I see people on the street running, like, that's like, I feel like a drug addict looking at drugs, because all I really want is to be able to go for a run, to just kind of go for a run and not have like flu symptoms thereafter and have like brain fog for 2 days later. And it took me years, and eventually I was able to do that. I was able to do park runs. But, I realized also that running was like a release for me to, when I kind of feel, upset or angry or whatever else, like a lot of people do that, right? We go for a run to clear your head. And then I couldn't do that. So I just had to find this other ways to do that. So I became a writer. I started writing my Life Tonic blog, which I was kind of writing about whatever interested me, so some, like how to live well, how to work well, that kind of stuff. Even went into like ethics and morals, which is again sort of quite a prominent topic now. And I think that I've discovered writing because of this illness. I would never have done that. Like, I would not have become a writer if I wasn't able to be more active, more physically active as I used to be. So it sort of became this, and I just know that, like, I think, I can't be bothered to write, I have a writer's block or whatever. But if I sit down and write, it's always, I'm always happy. That's kind of my thing. So I think that, like, people who are experiencing long COVID or any other chronic kind of illnesses which have changed their lives, they kind of need to see all the good things that happened to them thanks to that very sad situation. And I remember that when I first, had to kind of quit my job back in 2013, and I used to have breakfast at home, which I never usually had. I mean, I just like would go on a tube or cycle to work. So I was having breakfast at home, and I started noticing that there were birds singing outside. Never, like, I literally was like, oh wow, I didn't realize we have like birds in London who sing. And then I realized that, that's like a blackbird, and that's probably it. Well, there are many more birds now, but and suddenly I thought, that is cool. Like, I'm having breakfast that I kind of cook from scratch, and I'm kind of taking time to have my coffee and my breakfast, and there are birds singing, and that's kind of cool. So, and if you're able to, notice, hopefully my cacti will blossom this year, maybe not. But that is like, I think if you're able to notice these little things, if you're able to have something creative that is yours, you will, be just, I don't know, happier, but more content in life.
I think that's amazing, and also to be, you don't shy away from difficult topics in Life Tonics, the articles either, do you? You like to delve deep into anything that's kind of coming up.
Yeah, well, hopefully, like, I think for me, I don't know how brave I am. So the one thing that is, very much on my mind right now is political situation in Russia, where, it's so hard to explain to someone, say, here in the West, because people live sort of in a parallel world there. Luckily, there are a lot of people who think like me, who completely detest Putin's regime and all the corruption and the, the killings and the repressions that are happening there right now. And it's literally getting worse and worse and worse every day, week, month, and year. And yet there are other people who just don't see that, refuse to see that. I think, as difficult as it is to imagine this, I think we can, because we all know people who, supported Trump and saw him, differently from people who completely hated the way he treated, women or disabled people or non-white people, whatever else. And yet there were people who kind of would just, see things differently. So I think, and I always ask myself, like how kind of brave am I about politics in Russia? And, and I'm not brave. So I think that I would sort of, at some point I thought, shall I just like try to go and get a job as a journalist for some, foreign media company and kind of become a, Russia correspondent. And it's, I think with my health, I probably cannot do that because it's like a, high energy, very stressful job. I simply wouldn't be able to do a good job. But again, when I'm kind of sort of writing on Facebook or talking to people, I used to write articles about Russia for media publications here. I think it really helped me to sort of feel that I was doing something good, because effectively my role was to explain to people here in the West that, Russia, Russians, Putin, Kremlin are different things, because there are plenty of Russian people who are wonderful. Russia as a country is amazing, but unfortunately we have Putin and co in charge, and that's very different. So I was kind of trying to show people in the West that as people, we're very much alike. And in fact, it is almost uncanny how similar Russian and Americans are. I'm not talking about New York or California. I'm talking about, Middle America and, east of Moscow. People are actually very, very similar, in terms of their mentality. So I think that, that's the one thing where you kind of, you do what you can. So recently, for example, so you may know that Russian opposition leader Navalny, who was, they attempted to poison him with Novichok last year, and then he being incredibly brave, returned to Russia because he wanted to live in the country which he loves, and he wants to continue to fight corruption and Putin's regime. So he returned. He was promptly arrested on some bogus charges, being that when he was in a coma in Germany, he then wasn't able to kind of come to police office in Moscow to kind of say, I'm here, because he had a suspended prison sentence from something which dates back, years. Anyway, so they, there was they trialed him. The verdict was written before the trial even began. He's in prison. He was asking for medical attention. He wanted to see kind of his own doctor or someone he can trust, basically as opposed to some prison doctor. He wasn't given that, and he was on hunger strike, and he was basically not doing very well. And so they organized protests in Russia. People came out in Russia, which was incredibly brave, because people lose their jobs. Like if you are, a teacher, and someone would find out that you've been to one of those protests, you are fired on the spot. Russia is doing really, it's a lot of, it's not doing very well economically after COVID. People, receive kind of that kind of profession, like a teacher would be really not paid very well. And even if you have your own business, your clients may turn away from you. So it's kind of, it's really, really dangerous to go out. And yet people went out and protested. And I thought, well, the least we can do here in London is to come out as well. On the one hand, if I go here in London to protest in front of the Russian embassy, who's going to be impressed? No one is going to be impressed. But at least we sort of, we kind of go and do that in solidarity with brave people who actually live in Russia. And we did, 300 of us kind of came together, and it was just such an incredible feeling and we, of course, we sort of, we were given permission to protest by the police here, and we sort of, we were all, wearing masks, which kind of, Russians law abiding, very difficult to believe. But yeah, but there were people of all ages, but a lot of people were young. And I know that, the sentiment in Russia is very much against Putin right now. So people see things for what they are. And I know that ultimately, Putin cannot stay forever. There will be some kind of very difficult transition, I'm sure. But people are not going to live without sort of fighting for better life, and that's incredibly encouraging. Even though I don't know if I'll see the kind of the fruits of it in my life, but yeah.
That's really interesting. And if people want to know more about it, well, I was just thinking, if they want to know kind of the basis of what's happening now, I mean, your book, The Bird's Milk, sorry, is quite a good place to start, isn't it?
Yes, well, I think it's like it probably is, in a sense that I describe the way I grew up in the Soviet Union, and then sort of as I moved to the West, and I'm looking back at sort of my family and friends back in Russia, and I'm trying to reconcile why our views are so different. So it sort of helps to give that background. To kind of put it simply, is because the transition in the 1990s from effectively communist state, command economy, to capitalist sort of liberal market, democratic country was very painful, and of course it's still ongoing. And so sort of people are trying to say, well, we don't want that. We don't want this like difficult times. And they're kind of trying to hold on to what they knew before, so they are, so, Putin is trying to say, well, Soviet Union was a good thing and we are important. So, and, and so that kind of philosophy translates into everything. So, for example, Russia has developed a vaccine, Sputnik V, amazing, well done. And yet, it's very hard. So, well, population doesn't trust the government, so people are reluctant to vaccinate. But also there is a shortage of vaccine because it's difficult to produce. It's kind of same technology as Oxford AstraZeneca. You need to grow cells. But hey, they sold the vaccine to a bunch of other countries in Africa, Latin America, Asia, Europe. So the priority is to sort of extend the Russian foreign influence on countries like, Serbia or, whatever, rather than to vaccinate Russian people in Russia. And that is so, on point for Kremlin to do that. Well, of course, it's very different here because we're happy to help, but we first want to put our own population first. Thank God.
Mm. Yeah, so really interesting things. And before we finish up, I do want to finish up talking about your outdoor swimming, because I think we've talked about how you think it's important to have creativity, to travel. I do listen to read your Facebook stuff. So yeah, creativity, travel, but I think also swimming is quite important for you as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so cold swimming, it became kind of quite popular now, right? But so it started with my yoga teacher here in North London saying, hey, I know a friend of mine who's got ME, started cold swimming, she got better. This is like a typical thing. So if you've got an illness which has no cure, there will be 1,000 different ways. You need to eat, roots of some Siberian ginseng and all sorts of things, which, is basically, old wives' tales. But so one morning, I kind of didn't feel very well. And I was just like, literally had no energy. And I was like, well, what's the worst that can happen? And this was, I think, 5 or 6 years ago now. It was March. I walked. So I think I took a bus and I walked to the ponds, Women's Pond in Hampstead Heath. And I got there and the temperature of the water was +4 degrees. I mean, for me, it didn't mean anything. It's like 4, 1, 15. It's all, it's a number. So here I went, so obviously you swim just in your swimsuit. There's no there's no, what do you call it?
Wetsuit.
No wetsuit. We're not talking about wetsuit. We're talking about just a normal bikini. Not bikini, well, I wear,
All in one.
All in one. And there are lifeguards, and they kind of talked me through. So they said, you need to go in kind of slowly. And as you get to your chest, that's when the brain gets a signal that, oh my God, someone is trying to kill us, because your heart and your lungs are kind of underwater in this cold temperature. So you need to kind of give it a moment. So you need to breathe very slowly. I mean, this is all happening in seconds, by the way, but still, so you kind of calm yourself down, and then off you go. And they said, well, you can kind of swim, can you swim to this next ladder, which was, I don't know, 3 meters away. And, so I swam to the ladder, and then I came out thinking, oh my God, what has just happened? My mind exploded. You get every single time incredible adrenaline rush. You're just feeling, it's just an amazing, amazing feeling. And then you kind of notice that fellow swimmers are women in their 70s or 80s even, and they lucky ladies that live in Highgate or Hampstead, and they come every day. I mean, I'm always trying to befriend them, because maybe one of them can give me their, sign me into their inheritance, but I haven't been very successful. I'm sure there is a queue of family members waiting for that to happen. Anyway, so it's got to be good for you. And so so normal people, so healthy people, as far as I understand, you get this incredible energy rush from being in cold water, and you sort of come out and you're energized for the day, which is amazing. So in my case, I have this amazing energy rush, and then unfortunately, after about an hour or two, I sort of dip, and I kind of like just get very tired, and then I kind of have to rest. But it's still sort of worth it. And it's incredible for your mental health. It's just such a special place. It's actually been proven to sort of help with depression, anxiety, but obviously just physical health, because, it encourages kind of your cardiovascular system to just kind of work. It's amazing. I cannot recommend it enough. And I think that, you just get addicted, and that's kind of like a good stuff, good addiction. So now I'm that type of person that if I, last year, of course, before COVID, I went for a weekend to Austria and for a weekend in Switzerland. That's just, February and early March. So just before like lockdown. And, every little kind of lake I find, which wasn't completely frozen, I would just go in. I mean, just for social media posts. So in fact, now the temperature is, I went a couple of days ago, it was 11.5 degrees. So it's practically balmy temperature.
Yeah.
But, it's always cold to get in. That's what people don't realize. Even if it's 20, it's cold to get in, right?
Yeah.
If 2 degrees or 20, it's cold to get in. It's just that with 20, you get used to it and you swim.
Yeah.
With 2, you kind of start losing sensation in your limbs, and that's a sign to get out.
I know that the ponds were not locked. They were closed during parts of lockdown. And in the second one, I think you were very glad you weren't here, because you could still go swimming in the sea when you were away. So that was very lucky. Now, where can people find out about your next adventure, your next short stories? Where can they find out what's happening in your life, Jana?
Well, I think that, so I do try to still write my blog, Life Tonic, which is lifetonic.co.uk. It's quite sort of sporadic. I don't do it regularly anymore, but there is an easy link to sign up, and I literally just, there's no kind of spam. It's just something that I write. And obviously people can kind of have a look and read the last couple of articles to see if they like that. And otherwise, I think Instagram is a good one, because I'm telling you, as soon as I'm out of here, because like right now, I'm like, oh, here is a nice book that I've read. Here is a nice dish that I baked. Here's my cactus. But as soon as I'm back on the road, you know, I'll definitely be posting some photos and stories from sort of traveling, because I mean, like, I'm just kind of like in this weird sort of nesting stage at home, but like once I get out, there'll be no stopping me. So Instagram, I'm Jana Bakunina, very easy to find.
Okay, that's fantastic. And I'll put the links in the description as well. Jana, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you. And I hope to see you soon face to face. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.